Hi! Today I'll be comparing 4 string tension measuring devices while tracking tension loss on 3 of my favorite string setups. Oh, by the way, this experiment will take a month to complete. So let's get started. In case you were wondering what inspired this video, well, it was my curiosity. I never compared these devices side by side, and I'll get into that in a little while, but I wanted to see how they compare not only to each other, but how they would track tension loss over a period of time. So I did want to talk about the 3 rackets that I strung and the string setups. So as I finish up this last racket, I can tell you about the first 2 that I strung, and they're all in the same racket. It's on a Phantom 100G. So on the first racket, I strung it with Lightning Pro, and this is my go-to synthetic strings that I recommend for a lot of players, and I'll pull up the comparison before so you can see how this string is a softer synthetic, and it has really good tension maintenance. It's pretty good in energy return, but the spin potential is really good, if you can see that. It does have really good snapback, so I strung this one at 50 pounds. On the second racket, I did a hybrid of Lightning Pro 17 on the mains, and then Tour XP, it's a Prince string, on the crosses. And again, with the with this setup, I did another video, so I'll provide the link where I got in more detail with that. But on the Tour XP is a polyester. It is a softer polyester. It has average tension maintenance and energy return, but the snapback, this spin potential is pretty good. So this is my go-to hybrid for a lot of my customers. And for this one, I strung it 50 on the mains and 48 on the crosses. Now, as for this third racket, I did a poly-poly hybrid. So I have the Prince Tour XP 17 on the mains and Vortex 18 gauge on the crosses. Now, this is actually my personal string of choice, and I'll do a future video where I'll talk about a poly-poly hybrid, specifically when you're combining 2 gauges. But again, I like the Tour XP for the fact that it's a softer polyester, and it has really good snapback. So next, what I'll do is I'll show you the 4 devices and how we'll go about taking those readings over a 1-month period. All right, so let's start off with the Babolat RDC. So what it's gonna give you is a value based on string bed deflection. And what that is this yellow part. It's called a tulip. When I turn it on, it's gonna press down on the string and come up with a value. So again, it's a number that's going to be compared to track tension loss. So what I'm going to do first is I have it centered in the string bed, and what I'm going to do is insert it in here, and I'm going to take 3 readings. I like to just make sure that what I'm seeing is accurate, and based on those 3 readings, I'll just average it out. So like on the first one, I got 50. Sometimes I'll get 1 high or 1 low, and then I have to average it out, but sometimes I get all 3 the same. So I got another 50, and I got 350. So I'm gonna enter that into the log that I'm keeping. And oh, another cool thing about this RDC, it can actually track potential energy in a string. So as we get later into this experiment, I'll share that with you. This next device is called the ERT700. It's the predecessor to the ERT300, which is the current model and that you can buy. In fact, I thought I would have to buy a new one because mine wasn't working for a while, but thanks to my friend Ken, and if you're watching this, thanks again for helping me, it's working. So the way it works is this unit is called a ball simulator, and when you attach it to the string bed, it sends frequencies into the string bed, and then it comes out with a value that's supposed to be the actual tension. So what I'm gonna do is go ahead and center it, and again, it's really important how you install this because you want to be consistent. So on this pattern where I have 18 crosses, I'm just gonna count up 9 crosses from the bottom, and and this bottom claw right here, I'm gonna attach that to that 9th cross, and I just want to make sure it's centered in the mains also. So I'm gonna have to hold this up here, and I'm gonna go ahead and it'll take a few seconds, but it'll come out with a reading. First it'll say 32, that's the DT, which is dynamic tension, and that's 46, that's actual poundage. So what's good about this device though is that not only can you track tension loss, but that DT number, you can use that to determine whether your customer needs to restring their racket. So when it drops below 10% and a maximum of 20%, then you can advise your customer to restring their racket. This next device is called Racquetune. It's a phone app that works off of the same principles and has software used for tuning musical instruments. So first what you have to do is you're gonna have to set it for the racket head size. So I have it right here, 100 square inch, 16 by 18 string pattern. Then you have to enter the strings. So in this setup, I have a hybrid. So I have the Tour XP, which is in their database. And for the crosses, I have a generic polyester 18 because they didn't have the vortex in there. So I have that set up. And once you have it ready, then what you're gonna do is you're gonna use, I use a blunt, my awl, and I'm gonna be tapping the strings, but it has to be in an area that's pretty quiet. So I'm gonna go ahead and tap it, and basically we're gonna go until this, there's gonna be a white circle that goes around that number. And once it reaches that number, then that's the tension that we're gonna log in. All right, so you got 44.1, but I'll go ahead and enter 44 into the log. This fourth device is called a string meter, and it's based off of a spring. And first you have to set the gauge of the string that you're working with. So there is a pounds and a kilograms. So I'm gonna pay attention to this arrow here and this side. So what I'm gonna do is first I have to insert this V groove, and basically it's gonna measure the size of the string gauge, and it's slightly over the 17 mark. So what I'm gonna do is when I adjust this arrow, it's gonna be slightly over that 17 mark. And then what I'm gonna do is insert this into the 9th cross, like I did on the other devices. And then I'm also gonna take a reading on 4 of the center mains, starting with the left side. And then I'm gonna record that and then average it out for my final reading. So I know that you're looking at this upside down, but I'm gonna go ahead and turn this, and I'm gonna stop when I see that string right in the middle of the V groove, and then pay attention to the numbers that are on here. So this first one, I got 41. And then I'm just gonna move it over and just stay along that 9th cross. Second one, I got 40. Third one, I got 40. And this fourth one, I got 41. So I got 162 divided by 4. So it's 40.5. So I'm just gonna round up and say it's 41. All right, so before we get into our initial readings on the 3 rackets and the 4 measuring devices, I did want to talk about reference tension and actual tension, because that question comes up a lot. So reference tension is what you set the machine at when you're stringing a racket. Now the actual tension, when you're measuring it using these devices, don't necessarily match up with the reference tension. In fact, a lot of times the readings come up lower. And factors that go into that are if your machine was calibrated, if your clamps are holding. It could be because of the elasticity of the string and the stringer's technique. So those are some factors that would contribute to a actual tension reading. For all of these rackets that I'm taking readings of the actual tension, it's right after it comes off of the stringing machine. So I would recommend the same if you're doing that for your customers, to always keep that consistent. All right, so anyway, we'll look at this chart I have here, and we'll start with the synthetic gut strung racket at 50 pounds, and going across, starting with the Babolat RDC. Now remember, that's a string bed deflection reading, so that's not actual tension that it's trying to come up with, but it does come up high, typically synthetic gut. So 59 is not surprising, even though I strung it at 50. The ERT came really close at 51. The Racquetune at 54, slightly higher. And the string meter at 42, that's not surprising because the string meter does tend to come out with a lower actual tension reading than the reference. All right, so going back down to the next racket on the hybrid synthetic polyester, you'll notice that I strung the crosses at 48. I typically would do that for a polyester string, whether it's in the mains or the crosses. I usually go down 2 pounds. So I wanted to string up the racket how I would typically string it. So in this case, we're looking at the Babolat RDC reading again. It came out a little lower, which makes sense because the polyester will tend to make it lower. Then the ERT, same thing, it dropped up 3 units. Racquetune, it dropped 3 units. And the string meter is still at 42. So yeah, as we get into it, you'll notice that the string meter readings are not that sensitive. So yeah, so anyway, on the hybrid poly racket, strung at 48, my thinking was I would string it at 48 to kind of match the 48 on the previous hybrid, but I probably should have strung it at 50 just to compare with the synthetic gut. But anyway, even if I strung it at 50, I think the RDC reading probably would have came out at 52, but in this case it was 50 because it was at 48. The ERT dropped a couple units there. This Racquetune from the previous racket, 39, that's shocking. I'm not sure how it came out that low. And the string meter at 41. So again, you'll see that there's not much difference in that reading. All right, so we're gonna take a look at these readings tomorrow, and I'll come back to you. All right, so day 1, I'm taking my final reading, and we'll take a look at the numbers. All right, so let's look at our day 1 readings. I'm gonna start with the first racket, the synthetic gut strung racket. And as I mentioned, the Babolat RDC at 59 yesterday did come out at 59, so it dropped 7 units to 52. And it's now closer to the reference tension, but the Babolat RDC will tend to do that, so it's not surprising. And this is for synthetic gut. On the ERT, it dropped 3 units, the Racquetune dropped 4, and the string meter dropped 3 units. So pretty good readings there. On the hybrid synthetic poly RDC reading, it dropped 6 units. Then we got the ERT at 2, Racquetune at 4, and string meter at 3. So on those 3 units, that was pretty consistent. And then on our hybrid poly, the reading wasn't as high on the Babolat RDC, so it only dropped 3 units. Then we have the ERT at 2, the Racquetune at 1. Now remember, that's the one that came out at 39 yesterday, and I thought it was an off reading, but being that it read 38, I guess it was right. So it dropped 1 unit, and then the string meter at 3 units. Now, if I'm taking a look at all 4 of these devices, starting with the Babolat RDC, again, it's good for string bed deflection or string bed stiffness, either way. But I'll notice that as I track tension, it starts to come down to what the ERT is reading. So on the ERT, I think it's a better device in measuring actual tension. So I would usually defer to the ERT if I'm trying to actually figure out the tension. And the Racquetune, yeah, that 39 kind of bothers me, but again, if you're using that to track tension loss, the main thing is you have that initial reading and you're able to use that same device as you're checking your customers' rackets. Now the string meter came out consistently at 3 units differential, if you notice on that column. And so that was good. All right, so we'll take a look at what the week 1 readings will reveal. And I didn't mention earlier, but on these 3 rackets, I'm not going to even play with them. I'm going to just leave them untouched. And for the purpose of this video, I thought it would be more accurate if I don't even play with them. So I'll see you in a week. Welcome back. So after these rackets have been sitting around for a week, I'm taking my final reading, and let's take a look at the numbers. All right, so if you take a look at this chart, I have week 1 in the red type. And again, we'll talk about each racket going across. And these numbers were kind of interesting, I thought. So on week 1 for RDC, the differential and how much it dropped was 4 units. ERT 2, Racquetune 3, and the string meter 0. And we'll talk more about the string meter later. On the hybrid synthetic poly, we have a drop of 2 units, and then looking at the differential from day 1 readings, the ERT came out at 0. It was 46 and 46. Racquetune at 1, and again, the string meter at 0. And our third racket, the poly-poly hybrid, we got a tension loss or string bed deflection loss of 2 units. Then we have a tension loss of 2 on the ERT, and Racquetune 1. And on the string meter, I have 40 with a question mark. I measured it more than once, and for some reason, it was actually coming out higher. And the thing about the string meter is I noticed that sometimes as the strings get older, sometimes they can get stuck in place, and that would definitely factor into why the reading would come out higher. So that was kind of odd. So I have a question mark next to it. All right, so if I'm taking a look at all of these 4 devices, again, I mentioned that the ERT, I think gives the most accurate reading in terms of tension. But if you look at the RDC readings, they're starting to get closer to the ERT in the string bed deflection. So that's interesting. And yeah, the Racquetune is dropping slowly, but again, as long as you're using the same measuring device, I think that's the main thing. But at this point, the string meter, I don't know how useful it is. All right, so I'm gonna let these rackets sit for another 3 weeks, and we'll take our final readings. All right, welcome back again, and I'm glad you could join me for this 1-month journey. So we're gonna take a look at the final readings, but I thought we should check each racket based on the pitch of the racket. So the higher one being the tighter one. So well, I'm gonna pick this one. This is the poly-poly hybrid, and this is the poly-synthetic hybrid. So let's compare it to the all-synthetic racket. And between these 2, I'm gonna have to pick this synthetic one. It was really close, but let's take a look at the numbers and see if it actually is tighter like it sounds. All right, so let's take a look at the chart with the 1-month reading and the green type. And let's look at just the Babolat RDC column first. So you'll notice that on the first racket, it's 47, and in parentheses, I have 59%. Now, what's kind of unique about the Babolat RDC, it can measure potential energy that's left in the string. So what it does is compares the initial reading with the reading that you take at whatever point you want to check on. So the 59% is still good. Whenever it goes below 50%, that's usually when they recommend restringing a racket. So looking at the second racket, it's at 65%, and the polyester is at 76. And the reason why the polyester is so high is that the initial reading compared to the reading that I took is not as great. So it'll be interesting to see if I actually played with the racket, how those numbers would change. So anyway, I wanted to just point that out. So let's take a look at the other 3 devices, and starting with the ERT on the first racket, and mainly the differential. So we got 51 as the initial reading on that, and it dropped down to 46, so that's a difference of 5 pounds. The Racquetune dropped 7 pounds, and the string meter 4. On the hybrid synthetic poly racket for the ERT, had -2, the Racquetune -7, and the string meter -4. Now the reading that I got on that ERT -2, I would have thought that that would have been a little bit greater because of the fact that polyester is on the crosses, or it doesn't matter if it was on the mains. But again, I don't know if it's because I didn't play with them that it just kind of stayed there. So so let's take a look at the hybrid poly, and that one shows up as a -4 in differential from 46 to 42. So that makes sense that it is higher than the synthetic poly hybrid. The Racquetune -3, and to me that doesn't make sense comparing that to the hybrid synthetic poly right above, because now it's less than the synthetic poly hybrid. And then the string meter at -2, so again that's less than the previous hybrid. So I hope you're following me on all of this, but to me the ERT is just more consistent in terms of the reading that I think it should have. And the ERT also has a function where you can measure the DT, and if it drops below 10 or 20%, I believe, then that's usually when you can recommend for your customer to restring their racket. Now remember earlier we did the sound test where I was pinging the 2 rackets, or the 3 rackets, and it came down to the last 2. So we have the all synthetic and the hybrid synthetic poly. And then I chose this one as the higher one. Well, if we look at the reading on the ERT, you'll notice that they're both at 46. So yeah, when you ping rackets like this, if a string gauge is thinner, it's gonna sound tighter. And this hybrid polysynthetic had polyester, which was a little bit thicker than the synthetic, so that might explain why it had a higher pitch. So yeah, you can't always go by the pitch. You have to make sure that the string gauge is the same to make sure you're comparing apples to apples. So with all of these numbers, I am very curious how it's gonna what the numbers will look like if I actually was playing with the racket. So I'm gonna string up these rackets the same way, take the readings at the same intervals. Of course, it's gonna take another month, but yeah, we're gonna make this a part 2 video, so I hope you can join me. Thanks for watching. Happy stringing, and let your strings play.